Okay, this is a book review. Here's the book In Pursuit of Wisdom by Phillip Campbell about Catholicism and science through the ages. And the basic point of this book, anybody who studied this stuff, the history of the Roman Catholic Church and its relationship to science, will realize that almost all of science came from the Roman Catholic Church in its original modern sense. The ancient Greeks did a lot of great stuff through their philosophers, but they really didn't do much to develop empiric science. That means science based on hypothesis, experiment, and analysis of data. And it was the Catholic Church that got all of this stuff going. The Catholic Church is the only literate people in the Middle Ages in Europe. The Catholic Church is the one, through its clergy, they saved the books of the ancient Greeks, they saved the books of the ancient Romans, they saved the books of the early Christians, both the Bible and the other writings, things like, St. Augustine's, Confessions, City of God, and all that. The clergy, being the only literate people in Europe of those days, most of the secular rulers were like barbarians, and they're illiterates. The church, taught people how to read. It copied all the manuscripts. It had chroniclers of history like the Venerable Bede. It had its own encyclopedias like Isidore Saville. And it also had clergy that were authors. It was the clergy authors that wrote down the verbal stories, for example, about the legend of King Arthur and everything that goes with it, like Sir Galahad and the quest for the Holy Grail and all of the other stuff that goes with it. Lancelot, Guinevere, etc., Sir Gawain. The monasteries were like the early trade schools and apprenticeship. The monks learned how to farm. They learned how to make beer. They learned how to make wine. And they really did a lot to develop agriculture. They did, methods of breeding horses to get better horses, making horseshoes. They developed ways to, make a horse saddle, to make horse shoes, to make a better horse harness, because the horse were better at pulling the plow than the oxen were. All of these things led to tremendous improvements in agricultural crop yield, which led to expansion of the population. They developed a way to rotate the fields, grow, one thing in this season, something else this season, and then have it run fallow. Like you can alternate beans, for example, to fix nitrogen into the soil. There was a big Carolingian Renaissance with Charlemagne around 800 AD. The unification of the Holy Roman Empire. He brought in an educator, clergyman, Alcuin, to teach the seven liberal arts and, to get people more educated. He wanted them to know the Bible well, for example. Cathedral schools then became the universities, and they were all run in the language Latin by the Pope, so scholars could travel from country to country. And it was easy to go between the different universities because everybody, spoke Latin. Latin was the international language. Nowadays, it's pretty much English. But it was good to have an international language so they could all communicate with each other. The Aristotelian and scholastic debates generated a free speech discussion, which led to a lot of learning. The churches also would hire professors based on excellence. So there was a desire for meritocracy and academic excellence. That's gone from the modern schools. Okay, the way you'll get promoted is for social nonsense rather than for academic stuff. I've been told by tons of students I'd be the best professor on their college campus, but I would never be allowed because I'm too controversial. Professors are not allowed to be controversial. I go, professors should be controversial. Anybody who's smart is going to be opening up the borders of knowledge in the field, so they're going to automatically say things that come off as controversial, that are beyond the textbooks. That's just normal high intelligence, okay? And that's why smart people need freedom more than a regular person. A regular person is going to stay in conformity within the bell curve. They're never going to say anything too interesting. They're not, smart enough or well-informed enough to challenge anything, okay? But a smart person who reads a lot, they know what's real and what's fake, so they're constantly going to be challenging the borders, so they need that free speech or they're always going to get in trouble because they know tons and tons of stuff in textbooks and other books is nonsense, okay? The Catholic Church really developed mathematics. It wanted good mathematics. It wanted good astronomy so it could make good calendars and it would know what was the correct day for Easter and the other holidays. There are a lot of mathematical scholars related to the church. Blaise Pascal, Gottfried Leibniz, inventor of calculus. Blaise Pascal, the early prototype computers, for example. The scholastic movement through, Thomas Aquinas and scholasticism, Albert the Great, for example, all of this just kept building on itself to make better and better universities. The universities were great when they were Christian. Nowadays, that universities are atheistic, they stink. The problem with atheism and scholarship is that atheism ruins scholarship. And the reason is the atheists always sell out for money. They don't have any morals. They don't have any moral or ethical foundation. So whenever money can be obtained, everybody just sells out, and you end up with a whole lot of nothing. Because sadly, the truth is typically less profitable than a lie. Okay. In the church, alchemy led to chemistry, astrology led to astronomy. Okay. And then the gradual building up of the cathedral skills, from the Romanesque styles led to the Gothic cathedral styles, which are still the most beautiful buildings ever made. The desire to have better music at church led to music improving from monophonic to polyphonic, and then all the modern stuff we have nowadays with the symphony, all the work of Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Handel, and the other ones. The whole scholasticism movement of the 1100s, 1200s, and whatnot led to the Italian Renaissance, and then Martin Luther, the Reformation, then the Catholic Counter-Reformation, with a progressive improvement in painting overall. Of course, we had magnificent painting back in the 1400s with Sandro Botticelli, Rogier van der Weyden, later Michelangelo, Raphael in the 1500s, then the Baroque painting like with Giovanni Tiepolo, for example, Andrea Pozzo, for example, Caravaggio. They're magnificent. In the 1800s, there was another Renaissance. Part of the 1800s Renaissance was there was a decrease in power of the monarchy, and so people had more freedom and more free speech, and more artistic impression came out of that. Just like you give people more freedom, and they're going to do more beautiful, creative work in the context. And you give them Christianity and freedom, and you get magnificent achievement in the creative arts. The churches made the first real hospitals. They made real charities where people voluntarily donated. The Scotland, in its desire to study the Bible, led to schools to teach the Bible, and this accelerated overall education. Once the people learn the Bible, then they can teach themselves anything, okay? It's more important to learn the Bible than anything else, and learn religion, because everything else follows from that. There's a lot of people in the modern world think, oh, you don't need religion, you just need science. They don't understand. You can't really have science without Christian ethics. I say that based on living my whole life in science, because what I see nowadays is the big corporations, they buy the journals, they buy the scientists, and then they just force them to publish fake nonsense. So unless you have something that says, no, the truth is more important than money, and Christianity is the only thing I know that can do that, or a Bible-based worldview, let's call it, on a large scale, you have to have that, or you can't have real science. Because otherwise, money becomes power, and it becomes the coin that decides everything. Anyway, Scotland did tremendous work, and that accelerated the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was especially led by England, and then France and Germany, and Scotland helped along in a big way, and then the USA got involved in the 1800s. Church also founded genetics with Gregor Mendel. So anyways, the more you study it, the more dominant the church was. Up until 1900, about 99% of science came out of the Christianity. First the Catholic Church, and then the Protestants did more. By the later 1800s, more and more secular forms of education and study and science were being performed, and then gradually other groups got in on it in the 1900s, especially in the the very late 1900s. But the whole foundation of modern civilization and science, it all comes from the Christian Church, from the Catholic Church and then the Protestant denominations. That's just a fact. It's just how it is. Anybody can study this. It's not just in this book. It's in all the books. It's in all the history books. I just read this one because I was trying to become an expert on the subject, because it's a long story. I'm writing this other book, and I had to go through all these books as just part of my background study. Anyways, I hope you found that helpful.